Okay, so we are officially recording, and this is Chris from Holy Retardation, and this is an official face review for me because up to now I was only using voice recording and pictures to create my videos. And you know what I'm talking about if you've seen my previous, reviews of HBO's Rome and my blabbings about history and whatever the fuck I'm talking about on my channel, which is everything. So once again, I'm Chris from Holy Retardation, and I'm a huge nerd. I'm kind of starting over because with a new face comes a new channel. Yeah, so I'm Chris. I'm a nerd, and I'm mostly nerdgasmic about history, ancient history, Roman history, Greek history not so much, but history as a whole, as well as medieval history. And besides that, I'm also interested, to put it mildly, in fantasy, in sci-fi, and whatever the fuck nerds are interested in nowadays. As you can see, my background, since this is my first video recording ever, I realized that I had to have a background, which I don't because I live in a crappy apartment. But for my first, face review video, I chose as a background this, which is the the proof that I'm a nerd. This is my painting of my favorite scene from Star Wars, and it's on a canvas with oils. You can see the scene, which one it is, from Episode 6, Return of the Jedi, when the Emperor, gets killed by his minion. That was my favorite scene from Star Wars, and you gotta keep in mind that this was from a long time ago. I'm not such a huge fan anymore. I now consider Star Wars to be, a little bit childish. Well, not a little bit, very much childish. But yeah, I'm a nerd. I enjoy Star Wars. I am passionate, very passionate about Frank Herbert, Isaac Asimov, George R. R. Martin, Tolkien, and mostly history nowadays. I kind of grew up in my nerdiness. I became interested in history via these things, via sci-fi and fantasy and whatever. How should I put it? Nerds have to progress in the stuff that they are reading and watching and experiencing. I began with Tolkien. I began with Star Wars. I began with Frank Herbert. I began with mainstream fantasy, and I grew to love history through them because all these things, they come from history. Let us take, for example, George Lucas with Star Wars. Star Wars is just, a fairy tale simplified metaphor of the Bible, of Rome, of whatever the fuck you can think of from the real world. Star Wars is just, a summed up fairy tale of all of that. You can compare the Emperor to the rise of Caesar in Rome. You can compare Darth Vader's redemption to the redemption of, I don't know, Jesus fucking Christ or something like this. You can compare all of Star Wars to Frank Herbert, which Dune by Frank Herbert is also sci-fi, because they usually classify, Dune and Star Wars under the same. They put them under the same umbrella, but they're not the fucking same. I mean, Dune is like, and Star Wars is like way, way lower down the scale of intelligence. But all of that, I outgrew it. Even I'd say Dune, I outgrew it as well because you couldn't say that Dune is childish, because in no way is it childish. Star Wars is childish. I mean, let's talk about Star Wars a little bit. I was wondering what was going to be the main topic of this video, of this first face reveal video, but you know, just fuck it. I'm gonna talk about whatever the fuck I want to talk about. So I was talking about Star Wars, how it's childish, and you know, most Star Wars fan, if they see this, if they find my channel and see this and hear what I'm saying, they're gonna wanna fucking kill me. But the fun part about this is that I don't give a fuck. Star Wars is childish. Yeah, it's fun, but it's dumb fun. It's interesting, but it's the childish way of interesting. You got the good guys and the bad guys, and they fight over, you know, control of the world. There's the evil empire. There's the good rebels. There's everything simplified that you would find in a fucking fairy tale. And they classify Star Wars as sci-fi. And then there's Dune, which they also classify as sci-fi. But in it, you've got, you know, politics, you've got intrigue, you've got philosophy, you've got history, you've got everything else that you could call mature being summed up into this sci-fi story. Okay, so I hit the pause to compile my thoughts, and I apologize, because this is my first, you know, video recording, and I'm doing this without, you know, writing the script for the video beforehand. And it's very intuitive for me, it's very spontaneous, it's very random, and my thoughts are not as organized as they might have sounded in the previous videos. So yeah, sometimes I can lose my trail of thought, but I don't care. So I was talking about how I outgrew Star Wars and Dune, because they're kind of childish. They're childish in different ways, but I think it's the natural way of the nerd to outgrow stories such as Dune and Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, in order to graduate to books and stories which concern actual world history. What I mean by that is, I think books that are less, and not just books, you know, books, movies, and whatever the fuck medium you perceive, you experience. Books and movies and stories as a whole are less mature if they're presented to you via fictional characters and events. And books and movies and stories that are more mature don't need, you know, the metaphors and the fictional element in order for them to be able to give their message, in order for them to make you learn their lesson. I became tired of fictional characters. I became tired of finding my idols in books like Lord of the Rings, and then being disappointed in how they don't actually exist and how they never existed. And you become desperate, you know the kind of nerd that reads books in order to escape from reality. I don't think that you have to escape from reality, because reality has just as many and just as interesting personalities and people that you can fall in love with, that you can experience as your idols and your personal heroes. World history is so long and so rich in characters and events that you don't need fictional elements to learn the qualities of a good life. You don't need to learn from made-up stuff. For example, let me give you a concrete example of what I mean. When I read, since I started talking about Lord of the Rings, let's start with Lord of the Rings. I read the book when I was about, I think 15 or, yeah, I was 15. And my idol from the book was Saruman, the White, the wizard. Uh, I'm not gonna explain why I like the villains. I'm the kind of person that always likes the villains more than the good guys because the good guys are just mainstream. The point is, my favorite a character from the book was Saruman, and he was my idol, and he was a person that I could look up to, a person that I wanted to be similar to. And as time passed, it started to hit me, how can you look up to someone who never actually existed? How can you want to be someone who you know never existed in the first place? And I became disappointed that this was all fictional, that I believed in, crap, in something that wasn't real. And then afterwards, I started reading gradually, not less fictional books, but more realistic in their fiction, if you know what I mean. And I'm talking about Dune by Frank Herbert. It's just as fictional as Lord of the Rings. Every character is made up, every event is made up. It's basically in the far future, I think was like something like 10 or 12,000 years ago. The book is just as fictional, is what I mean. But its fiction is more realistic. You meet more, human characters with more traits, with more gray nuances, if you know what I mean. The Lord of the Rings is very black and white, and that's why I loved, Saruman in the first place, because he wasn't so black and white. He was kind of gray in the books, and then the rest of the rest of it was like just, orcs and the good guys, which is like simple. But then in Dune, although it was just as fictional, it was more realistic, because you got more different characters with different motives that weren't just purely good and bad. You got your confused emperors, you got your corrupted politicians, you got the loving person who's also a killer, and so on. It wasn't more realistic factually, but it was more realistic psychologically and philosophically, and it made me grow up in my understanding of characters and of people as a whole. And then with the growth of the realistic element of the characters, I came to grow up when it comes to the story itself, because then I realized all of the characters were more realistic in Dune. The events were also completely made up. It was also, I was gonna say bullshit, but it's not bullshit, it's just not real. Which may sound, kind of stupid of me to say, but it's true, it depresses you. Fictional stuff is just depressing because it was never there. It never existed. So I started turning towards not just more realistic characters, but also towards more realistic stories, and it brought me gradually to many books and movies. But the ones that come to mind right now, which are my favorite books of all time to this very day, books like I, Claudius by Robert Graves, and Julian by Gore Vidal, The Accursed Kings by Maurice Duron, if I'm pronouncing the French name correctly, which I probably am not, but whatever. These are historical novels, and the advantage of these novels is that the characters are real, or at least were real. Not all of them, but like 80% of them were real. Their motives were real. Their purposes were real. Their psychologies were real. Their spirits existed. They were living at some point in history, in the history of this world. The places that their stories took place were all real. Rome exists. I, Claudius, is one of the greatest novels that I ever read. I mean the two Claudius books, which are, the first one is I, Claudius, and the second one is Claudius the God, which deals with the first century AD Emperor Claudius, who was a Roman leader that you would not perceive as the most capable ruler at first sight, but he turns out to be something of a badass motherfucker at ruling the Roman Empire. That's basically the story of, Tyrion from Game of Thrones, only it's real, it's fucking real. I, Claudius is an amazing novel. If you can find the time, just fucking read it. I love fantasy, I love sci-fi, but fuck Tolkien, fuck Frank Herbert, and fuck everyone else. Read historical novels. What else? Julian by Gore Vidal, and this one is even better in my personal list than I, Claudius, because the story itself is much more touching. It's much more effectual in terms of drama. Let's talk about a little bit about Julian by Gore Vidal. I may be doing a review of each of these books specifically in the future, but I don't know any specific. I don't have any specific plans, so whatever. Julian by Gore Vidal is another historical novel about the Roman Empire, although the later Roman Empire, which is scientifically called Byzantium. It takes place in late antiquity, which is like the 4th century AD. A lot of things happened back then. Christianity was taking over the civilized world. The pagan gods were all dying. The old religion of Greece and Rome was dying out. And Julian was an emperor of the Roman Empire who lived on the border of these two religious worlds. He lived precisely when the old religion of the Greek pantheon was dying, and when the Jewish/Christian God was taking over the world. And it's a time when philosophy is dying, when old Greek temples are being destroyed or turned into churches. And it's so sad and it's so dramatic, because you see him, he's a philosopher. Julian is a philosopher. He grew up to believe in the Greek gods. He grew up to believe in philosophy and to love it and to be a free-thinking person. And he was repulsed by Christianity, by its strict laws, by its pursuits of science and philosophy. He was just against this new world order, no matter how that sounds, because that's what it actually was. Christianity completely changed the ancient world. It's actually how the ancient world became medieval, if we can put it in such a summed up form. What I mean is, Julian is the story of a tragic man who lived between two worlds and who could not survive the transition. His story is a story of the guy who didn't survive, the comet, the big comet. It's like a dinosaur that tried to survive after the comet, and he didn't. It's a beautiful story of a man who believes in himself, a man who believes in his principles and who stands up to what he believes in, and he gets crushed by faith, he gets crushed by everyone and everything, and even to the very moment of his death he remains true to his beliefs. More realistic. What I mean is, we have the same stories, we have the same characters, we have everything that is fictional in the real world. We have their real life equivalents, and we don't need to keep our idols fictional, you know what I mean? That's how you start. It's true that we always start with fairy tales. It's true that the beginning is always fictional because this way it's more beautiful, it's not so harsh, because a young mind cannot perceive such, you know, crude stories, such ferocity. But you have to outgrow this, because the real world and real history has the same characters and the same dramatic stories, and they're even more effectual when you don't have to filter out the stuff that could traumatize you, the stuff that could upset you. You can take it with all the darkness and with all the cruelness that it comes with. And right now I came up with another great example, which I don't know how the fuck it didn't come up in my mind in the first place, but it's George R. R. Martin and the Song of Ice and Fire. It's an amazing series. The 5 books are all amazing, and Game of Thrones, you know, the show, you know, it became very popular and mainstream and kind of whitewashed and dumbed down for the mainstream public, but it's fucking awesome all the same. George R. R. Martin and his Song of Ice and Fire, it's all fiction. It's every single character in there is fictional. All the events are also fictional, but they are all based on real life history, on medieval history. Every character that you see in the Song of Ice and Fire, every location almost, you can find in real history. And I don't mean that George R. R. Martin just got inspired by real history to create his world. He literally, you know, just copy pasted it into his books. For example, look at King's Landing. King's Landing is an exact copy of medieval Constantinople, which is modern day Istanbul. Absolutely the fucking same. The siege of Constantinople, with, you know, the Ottomans and the Golden Horn, which is Blackwater in Game of Thrones, and then Tyrion's chain. There was also a chain in the siege of Constantinople. It's just the fucking same. He wasn't inspired by history, he copied history. And I don't mean this as a criticism, I don't mean it as an insult or something. I love Martin's books. You are fucking awesome, George R. R. Martin. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's anything to be ashamed of. I'm not saying that he doesn't have imagination. You have to have fucking imagination to transform real history into something that's, you know, yours. Because although it's absolutely the fucking same, he kind of made it his own with style. I don't know how exactly to put it, but yeah, that's how I feel. I don't think he did anything bad with his copy and paste method. It's just very transparent, it's very fucking obvious, especially if you're a history geek. But I'm okay with it, because I fucking love his books, and I fucking love the show. What I'm saying is, let me get back to my topic, which was the growth of a nerve from fictional to historical. What I'm saying is that although the Song of Ice and Fire is completely fictional, its characters are very realistic, its events and stories are very realistic, not always, but most of the time. And stuff like this, stories like this one, make you kind of, as you read them, they make you hungry to know where the inspiration for them came from. Because when you read a book and you fucking love it, you also feel this need to see where it came from, where the idea of it sprang from. And when you read The Song of Ice and Fire, and you hear people say that it's based on, that it's inspired by real life history, you suddenly want to know this history. I've literally seen this. People who read George R. R. Martin become, huge history geeks because of his books, and that they previously were not history geeks at all. But this is the method. I mean, in the fictional, you gotta use the fictional in order to proceed to the real, to the historical one, to outgrow fiction, so you can get thrown into the real world. Because I think this is the whole point of it. All these stories try to teach you a lesson to make you a better person. And you become a better person in order to improve the world. I don't think, as a whole, there's a more important purpose to all of this. All art, all stories, all movies, all fucking books, they all try to teach us something. Not the stupid ones, not Transformers or something. I mean, the quality books, the quality movies, the quality stories. They try to teach you a lesson so that you become a better person, so that you help the world more, so that you improve the world that you live in now, which is the real world.